Hi, everybody. It's Alex once again from the Remote Work Life podcast. And today I'm joined by Ben Davis. He's the co founder of Saxbury, a pioneering consultancy shaping the future of residential hospitality. Now, Ben has spent more than 2 decades across service apartments, apart hotels, co living spaces. And these are sectors that have become essential for co located and remote professionals alike. Founders, consultants seeking flexible, high quality places to live and work around the world. In this episode, we'll talk about how the rise of remote work is reshaping corporate accommodation, from what professionals look for in flexible stays to how landlords, agents, and other stakeholders are adapting to meet the evolving needs of an evolving workforce. Ben, thank you very much for joining me today. Very welcome.
Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to this.
Yes, me too, me too. So yeah, Ben, I'd like just keep this conversation, as I mentioned, around accommodation, all these different types of accommodation that, to be honest with you, I don't really know that much about them. When I started, as I mentioned to before in the conversation that we had before, there are so many different sort of connotations and so many different people offering different things. I myself have had to stay in serviced apartments, and me being the ignorant one, obviously you always think about Airbnb, but there's so much more to it than just that. So we're going to be exploring that today. But first, could you just start by giving? I know I gave you a bit of an introduction, but tell me a bit about yourself and how you got into this area of work.
Try and keep it short and sweet. I set up Saxbury after being self-employed for about 7 years, working as a property finder for primarily for corporate housing companies, and that came about because I'd spent a number of years understanding about the demand side of temporary accommodation. So I worked for a global corporate booking agency many years ago in sales. So I built relationships with the key bookers of temporary accommodation. So those companies that had global mobility requirements, employees that were traveling around and needed to have those employees working out their office for extended periods, maybe periods that would be longer than it would be comfortable to be in a hotel. So my job at the time was to identify who these businesses were, who the decision makers, travel bookers were, and get on the phone to them and let them know that there was something more comfortable, a comfortable alternative, and maybe less costly to staying in a hotel. And at the time, it was very much a concept sell because this was pre Airbnb, and we were effectively offering business grade accommodation in comfortable flats for their employees, and promoting that happy, comfortable employees work harder and stay longer. But it was very much a concept sale. And I spent a number of years working within that sector, first as an agent and then going to work for an operating company, corporate housing company, and did some consulting for a while for another corporate housing company, primarily in sales, bit of supply chain management. Realized I could see that the sector was growing rapidly, as in business take up and demand for corporate housing was strong. I could see that the corporate housing companies were looking to grow not only their client base, but also their property portfolio. And many of these companies didn't really have dedicated property acquisitions teams, so people to help expand their footprint in line with their demand for the clients. And similarly, you could see that the estate agents, the real estate sector, didn't really know what corporate housing was. They understood that maybe they could rent a whole building to a business, but they didn't really know that there were intermediaries out there that were leasing up buildings and then offering them as service departments to their clients for shorter periods. So recognizing a gap, if you like, I wanted to try and fill that knowledge gap, which was building relationships with real estate owners, investors, estate agents, and then connecting them with corporate housing companies that had demand. So really interpreting what their demand was, identifying these blocks in key locations where I knew that the demand would be strong, and then working to present those to the operating companies and negotiate favourable terms for both parties. So I had a bit of success with that. Did that for about 7 years, and then on a project, I met a chap who worked for another real estate agency, And over quite a long period, we worked out a business plan to focus on building a real estate consultancy focused purely around service departments. And I guess at the time, there wasn't really anybody doing that because the service departments and apart hotels are they come within under the hotel use class, so they've always been established and successful hotel brokerages, the likes of the big agents like Savills and Knight Frank, etc., etc. But that nobody really had been specialising on this that seemed like an alternative or a niche, if you like. And so I felt that there was certainly an opportunity there to present to the world, to the investors, to the operators, that there's somebody and there's a team of people that understand this sector with a real, I guess, niche experience. And so we set up Saxbury to provide that advice, both to developers, to operators, to investors, everybody in that value chain, and offer solutions, brokerage, development advisory in that space. So we've been doing that now approximately 9 years, and yeah, still here.
By the
Yeah,
sounds of it, yeah. And because, like I said, I still think there's still on the side that I'm on, at least the side I've also been in the sort of on the corporate side. So I've also had situations where I've had to book accommodation myself, or at least somebody within the corporate headquarters, HR, or we didn't have a global mobility team, had to book that accommodation for me. And their go-to is just like I said, Airbnb. Just look at Airbnb or something like what's the hotel chain called? Those little Premier Inn. So things like Premier
yeah,
Inn.
yeah.
So, but I've learned so much just looking at your LinkedIn profile, to be honest with you, and also obviously looking at the Saxby website in terms of the variety of accommodation that is out there, the kind of options that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think if you're an employee or if you're a PA, travel department or something, and you've got to find accommodation for your employee. I guess it starts with under, there's the need. So and so needs to be in a certain place for a certain period. It's about trying to find out. I guess firstly, what does the employee really want? What are they going to be comfortable with? Are there budget requirements as well? If somebody's staying for, longer than 3 or 4 days or a week or more, then yes, an apartment would be ideal. It's probably going to be less expensive. It's certainly going to be more comfortable because people can cook for themselves and eat what they want when they want rather than being restricted around breakfast. And there's also, there's lots of other reasons why businesses book corporate housing or service departments. It could be a lady traveling on her own, not and wanting to be more self sufficient rather than having to dine in the restaurant. It's just these things when
Yeah.
you're a regular traveller, you probably want to do things more on your own schedule. And the different types of accommodation, I mean, it must be very difficult for businesses to work out what's what because you'll look online, you'll Google service departments in Birmingham, for example, and you won't know who's an agent, you won't know who's an operator, you won't know who owns their flats, who rents them. You might not care, but actually, what you care about is, are they is the flat real? Is it clean, safe, and legal? Is the operator going to be professional like a hotelier? And are you going to get any blowback from the employee when they check in?
Yeah, I think I mean, we talked about this as well last time we spoke, but yeah, you do. That's what I would care about, or at least if I was booking on behalf of somebody else, I'd care about their comfort, the facilities, all those different types of things. And I just did an exercise, a couple of weeks after we finished speaking, just to see, if I was trying to book an apartment in, I don't know, in centre of London, for example. I just did an exercise. I thought, let me see how easy it is for me to do that, and it it really wasn't because you obviously again you've got Airbnb, but as I said last time, there's like you see these different websites and you can't distinguish whether the website is an agent or is like some sort of aggregator of apartments or apart hotels. And then you kind of go down a bit of a rabbit hole. So it's kind of like, and I couldn't see any sort of necessarily any sort of, is there any regulator to sort of like, I don't know, that helps you with going in that direction of which ones are the ones that worthwhile staying at, or
There is a company called the Association of Service Department Providers. It's been around
Mhm,
for a long time. Um, it's it's an association that uh, professional service department operators can seek them out, join them, get accredited. So somebody will come visit their properties and give them a seal of approval based on a number of different hallmarks and factors that business travellers demand, safety, legality, all those kind of things, and then they're part of that group. But again, it's very niche and it's difficult. And companies will then promote that they're registered with the ASAP, and then I guess that's a hallmark of quality. But I guess if you don't know what ASAP is,
mhm.
then you don't know to look for it. So
Exactly.
the ASAP team, who I know really well, there's some great people. They will promote this to the nth degree. But I guess until it becomes sort of somehow enshrined in law with respect to property use classes and what one must do to operate serviced accommodation,
Mhm.
then it'll always be something that you're always just trying to eagerly, but at the same time have a huge amount of barriers to. You mentioned about how you find property and the different sorts of property, and yeah, it's really really difficult, and a lot of the time when you find service departments on a website other than Airbnb, other than booking.com, you might not even be able to actually reserve them for specific dates. You might just have to make an inquiry and wait till they get back to you. And that's mainly borne out of the fact that, if you're an operator and you've got a block of 20 flats and the majority of your guests staying for 30, 60, 90 days, these people might have an option to extend. So the last thing you want to do is pull the rug from beneath them and sell dates in advance for 3 nights or 4 nights. So, these short stays effectively fill voids. And so it depends on
Yes.
the strategy. And then conversely, you've got a lot of people, the operators on Airbnb, they're actively targeting short stays for higher rates, leisure guests, and they do the
Mhm.
other way around. They kind of sell the short stays well in advance. And if you want a long stay and corporate wants to stay for a week or a month, then you might have a hard job actually getting into that flat because the availability calendar's been
Yeah.
pieces. So that's why I guess it's best if you're a business traveller, or yeah, if you're a repeat regular apartment user, maybe not to use websites like Airbnb, maybe to use
Right.
specialist travel booking companies, specialist apartment booking companies, relocation companies, because they tend to have an account manager who'll do it for you. You tell them what you need,
Right.
assessment. They say, okay, Alex, so and so needs to be in Birmingham for 2 months. Within a matter of half an hour, they sent them a list of vetted options that are all available, and they all meet the budget and the requirements. And companies like Silver Door Booking Agency, they're pretty much one of the biggest global booking agencies. They've got big global supply chain, and they'll be able to handle your needs and provide a good service with it as well, and sort of demystify the whole process.
That's what you want. You don't want to have. I mean, like I said, I spent as an exercise. I just spent like probably 30 minutes, and I still didn't get to the point where I was like, "Yep, that's the one." So I can only imagine that if you got a corporate team, or if you're again somebody like myself, it's going to be difficult. But I've noticed as well. I mean, there's so many different options. We talk about apart hotels, all these different kind of variations. Have you, Ben? Have you seen the needs of professionals' businesses change over the years? I mean, even since I mean, I've noticed it, but I don't necessarily know what it is, if that makes sense. But I've noticed that there's more. It's more in your face a bit more in terms of your ability to go to a co-living place or your ability to go to a service apartment. Is that something that is you notice as well? I'm sure you have.
I mean, like what's in a name, I guess. Like service department. What is a service department? It's an apartment being serviced, but what does that really mean? The service department sector is a bit of a catch-all for corporate housing, apartment hotels, and in its purest form, a service department generally would be like an operating company who probably signs a lease on a building, decorates it beautifully, nice furniture, provides cleaning once a week, bundles in the bills, and then makes it available for periods of weeks and months to corporate guests. Part hotel, maybe more relatively new. here in the UK. They've been actually quite popular in places like Australia and elsewhere in Europe and Asia for, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years, believe it or not. But an
Okay.
apartment hotel is essentially, maybe 50, 100 units in a block. So more hotel kind of volume units, each unit being kind of like a self-contained studio, one bed or two bed flat, probably a bit smaller than a regular home. Still with that service element, housekeeping, bills included, normally with the front desk. So you kind of
Mhm.
walk through. It has that sense of security that when you walk through the door and you might see somebody, there might be a gym, it might even be a cafe or something, and then you can rent these flats for periods of a night or maybe 3 months or 4 months. And so that's a more sort of, I guess, sort of sanitized corporate version of the service department, if you like.
Right.
And, and leisure guests will choose that because they, everybody likes the idea of an Airbnb, but sometimes the reality falls short. Like, it looks beautiful pictures, and then the reality that you're in somebody's home kind of, doesn't work
Yeah.
for a lot of
Yeah.
or maybe they're inexperienced travelers and they just like this notion of security where they go in through a front door and they go upstairs and then there's not a door onto the street. So part hotels work for that
Mhm.
reason. And groups of friends and leisure guests might book it over the weekend because they can they've got dare I say a bit of a party pad or somewhere to get ready before they go out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
fine. So yeah,
Are they
and
normally do they normally have like communal spaces in the apart hotels as well? Because that's something I'm noticing a lot. People are sort of demanding more. Is sort of if they, especially like you said, these groups of people get together, they have want these communal spaces. Is that something that's prevalent?
it's something that it's always a challenge when you're a developer because you're looking at revenue or development costs on a price per square meter. So if it's non-revenue generating space as a developer, you've got to kind of ask yourself why is it there?
Why
But
is it there? Yeah.
you tend to find you certainly find communal spaces within co-living developments. Co-living is essentially residential rather than hospitality, but there are elements of hospitality that are crept into co-living and to make it a more interesting rental product. Co-living in its purest form is essentially, it's built around accommodation. It's residential accommodation for people staying, certainly 3 months, but probably 12 months. They probably have a little, I guess, nearest thing I could describe it as if you think of purpose-built modern student accommodation, but
Okay.
then
Yep.
make it available to non-students.
Hmm.
Uh, Maybe the design is slightly more or less studenty. Instead of having a common room, you're going to have maybe a co-working room where the residents can come down from their probably tiny flat, but come and enjoy some communal facilities. And
Hmm.
these communal facilities act as a value add on the rent because maybe somebody's paying an all-inclusive rental upstairs that might be proportionally slightly higher than it would be if they were renting a room in a share flat. But actually, when you bundle in your bills and when you've added a gym, a cinema room, you don't have to take that gym membership.
Yeah.
It actually kind of makes sense, and communal aspects are effectively the hook for upstairs. But in an apart hotel space, normally the communal spaces would be, maybe more minimal again because of development costs, and it's probably reserved to be things like co-working or maybe even a coffee shop.
Got it. You actually answered my next question actually quite a lot, which is good because obviously when you're booking, you obviously expect good Wi-Fi, but apart from that, you're gonna have a cinema. Well, I wouldn't mind a cinema room actually, but that'd be more in a co-living space, as you were saying. What other sort of default facilities should, especially as a corporate, would you sort of expect? Because I know I'd want a desk at least.
Well, yeah, like I think let's just say most of the corporate focused service department companies generally post COVID, post lockdown, really, they had to find ways of cramming desks in the flats because actually a lot of people that were booking them were either not in an office or they were thinking, or maybe they were, self-employed people. And I thought, rather than book a hotel and get a co-working space, I need to be in this town, this city for a week or a month visiting clients. I'm just going to book a service department, but I need this to be my office as well.
Hmm.
So a lot of these companies were making sure that they can put a desk in there. I guess, some were just, I don't know, saying, "Oh, well, you can work at the dining table," but actually, that's not really very comfortable when you're coming
No.
up. So yeah, no, a lot of the good corporate housing companies I know uh, would make sure that they have a desk, work table in there, a work chair. Sorry, obviously good strong Wi-Fi, or the ability to upgrade that Wi-Fi to something slightly stronger for a cost. But you know what? Apart from that, there aren't really many work or specialist work provisions put into the plan.
Hmm.
Um, they have a coffee machine, but you kind of expect that anyway. An espresso
Yeah.
or something. There's one company I came across that actually was very focusing their service departments very much on the worker, where they would put a desk in there and they would put like dual screens in there, so you could just go
Okay.
and put your in
Yeah.
company in London. Can't quite remember the name now. And yeah, they're called Remote Lease. And they're kind of growing throughout London. Good company. But yeah, so maybe if you're a tech person, you don't have to take all that paraphernalia with you, do you?
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah. Exactly. But I guess then, because you talked about your relationship, your intermediary, landlords, investors, etc. Are they
yeah.
sort of open and adapting to this new wave of professionals? Because I can only imagine if there's a landlord looking to rent their premises, they're thinking, I just want a tenant in there. I want a tenant. But are they sort of open now to sort of different types of tenant, and are agents the same?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's getting there. I feel like maybe things are coming full circle now. I mean, there was a time where, when I first set up the business, you were contacting. So generally, I would speak to landlords that have multiple dwellings in one building, so like a whole block of ideally, one bed flats, because these would be quite popular for corporate guests. And we would speak to these landlords and say, look, put some decent furniture in there. You'd specify what that's like, and then the operator would give, maybe a 5 year or a 10 year rental agreement, and the owner would think, well, that's great because they've got a secure tenant for the next 5 years, going to look after the building, maybe take care of light repairs, and all they have to do is put some furniture in it. Obviously, after Airbnb came about, every man and his dog's doing short lets, and for very short periods, to probably a lot of the time people that haven't really been vetted. So landlords then became very, very wary of these properties being used or misused by the operator. So a lot of landlords and estate agents kind of pulled back for offering these buildings. But I would say it's coming back full circle. Why? Because, well, we had an interest rate shock, a couple of years ago, and what that did was that made it increasingly difficult for private buy-to-let landlords to actually make any money, or really to stay in the game, because a lot of buy-to-let landlords, they just wanted a good tenant to pay their rent. They didn't enjoy being a landlord. They were holding it for capital growth, and while they made some money and they weren't being taxed too much, they kept it. But then obviously the incentives were removed, the taxes increased, the interest rates went up, and a lot of buy-to-let landlords just got out of the game.
Mhm.
So, you know, what's replacing those buy-to-let landlords is often more commercial landlords, or landlords with more commercial aims. And that, in conjunction with the recent thing that's gone through Parliament, which is called Renters' Rights Bill, is making it less exciting for private individuals to buy to let properties and rent them to the average Joe. So what we're seeing is having it coming full circle, where you've got more commercial parties going into investments, buying or redeveloping blocks of 5, 10, 50, 20 flats, maybe even a whole apart hotel, and then finding corporate tenants to sign a long-term lease agreement, because obviously their return requirements are probably slightly, in some respects, they're looking for a good income guarantee. They're not looking to deal with private tenants.
And
Yeah.
are remote. I mean, I know this is the remote worker podcast. I've got to ask some remote specific questions. Are remote workers digital nomads? Are they sort of becoming more into the mix of those seeking those types of accommodations? Whether that be people who are, I don't know, the solopreneur or the digital nomad, or even the corporates who are seeking stays for their teams. Is that coming into the mix more?
I mean, I guess they're all like there are so many, like if you've got like a I don't know, a pie chart of demand for like who stays in the service department. Like, it's just so varied. You know,
Hmm.
there would be maybe the biggest slice of that pie would be business travel, and it would be business travel that is booked for or by blue chip organizations and their relocation companies. And so in that case, that demand hasn't really changed other than maybe the length of stay might have changed. Like, uh, originally businesses might relocate somebody for a long period, a senior, they give them a flat for 3, 6, 9 months, give them a flat for 12 months to see how the project works out and to help with the costs. And now a lot of that has kind of been reined in, mainly in line with a lot of corporate sort of ESG and carbon, trying to meet carbon neutral targets, reducing travel and all that kind of good stuff. So wanting to travel less, but still, I would say the majority of the demand for service accommodation is that sort of corporate white collar stuff. Then you've got construction workers, right? You've got people blue collar
Okay.
work. So there could be a project where they're going to be building for the next 18 months, and they've got to get a workforce into a place because they haven't got everybody there. They're coming in from wherever it is, Ireland or Scotland or around the country. They've got to be able to accommodate a whole bunch of brickies or construction people or structural engineers in share flats. So that's one type, right? And that they could stay for months on end. There's leisure guests. Then you mentioned about digital nomads, and that's a whole other sector. And I think a lot of the time, I mean, I'm not one of those, so I can't speak with confidence about it. But I'd like to think that if I could go anywhere in the world as a digital nomad or a solopreneur, would I come to London? I don't know. Is there somewhere warmer, nicer, less expensive, safer?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
you basically when you're an individual entrepreneur, solopreneur, you mentioned it's like you've got choices, haven't you? But when you work for a corporate, you go where you're put.
This is it. And actually, last time we spoke as well, because I recently moved out of London to kind of get away from the from the hustle, and I at the time I didn't really I didn't wasn't really thinking about like service accommodation, short term accommodation. All I was thinking about was actually I want to kind of get out of London. I want to sort of bit more greenery, a bit more sort of, had I probably put more thought into it, it was such a stressful period of time moving. We were just thinking about getting somewhere to rent. What we probably should have done is like like a service accommodation.
Because that's the
Yeah.
thing with relocation. Like you've got relocation firms out there that deal with the needs of employees, and imagine you work for uh, medical company, and you have to and you live in the States, but they've said, look, you've got this senior job in Oxford, for example, and it's a nice place, and you're thinking, okay, well, I probably won't want to buy in Oxford. Last thing you want to do is buy somewhere now before you even know what it's like to live there.
Yeah.
So rent service department for a couple of months, 2, 3 months, gives you a chance to actually get a feel for specific areas. You might say,
Hmm.
actually, I'm city, but I don't want to live there because I don't know, it's not convenient, or it's noisy, or whatever. And then you get to work out where is good, and then you can finally put down roots.
Yeah. Precisely that. We've just sort of we signed ourselves into a nice 12 contract.
Yeah.
I mean, we got lucky because we were in a nice location, but it doesn't always work out that way. I had a story of one of my friends. He actually moved. He's moved twice now, and again he signed this long term accommodation. When what he should have done, he should have got something a bit more short term, with his kids and something. And you can get quite nice places as well. That's another thing I didn't realize. I just assumed in my ignorance that short term accommodation is just an apartment. When now it's kind of you know houses. You've got 4 or 5 bedroom houses as short term accommodation, which would have been for me. I've got 3 kids, so there's 5 of us, so that would have been ideal for us again. So I've learned a valuable lesson, an expensive lesson, or he has anyway. So what's on the horizon then for you, Ben, and any exciting projects that you're working on? Anything exciting in the world of short-term accommodation that we need to be aware of?
Maybe exciting for me. So the big area for my business from the start of this year, from January, we launched a development advisory service. And what that is in its purest form is we noticed, or speaking to developers, investors, and landlords across the country, that a lot of commercial landlords were perhaps struggling to work out what the future held for their block, meaning commercial values or commercial yields have moved out, making things and interest rates have gone up and build costs have gone up, making it more difficult for commercial landlords to build properties. And this development advisory service helps landlords understand how they can take their building into more defensive territory. I'll give you an example. Um, a lot of clients will speak to will own an office in a prime location, and there might not be enough demand, or they might have tried to let that building in its current state and they struggled. But actually, that building will convert quite well into something else. And maybe the natural route might be to say, okay, well, let's convert it to residential, but with no guarantee of what the exit is, because imagine you take an office block and you convert it into 50, 60 very similar flats, you're holding quite a liability there to sell 50 or 60 flats. So the idea of perhaps creating something more hospitality shaped is quite appealing. The developers don't have to go through the whole affordable housing kind of question that building, they're going from commercial to commercial. They're able to build something apart hotel shape. If only they knew what an apart hotel really looked like, what were the characteristics of it, what would the layout be, what would the P&L look like, what's it going to cost to develop it, who are the good architects. So it's all that knowledge gap that we seek to bridge with the development advisory service. So we offer that to commercial landlords up and down the country, from Edinburgh to Brighton and everything in between, anywhere where it might be viable or sensible to open an apartment hotel. We go through those feasibility scenarios, and then very quickly, developer or investor can work out, is this viable? And if it is, we can take it to the next step, which is they'll obviously go and get planning, and then we can look to identify an operating solution. So bring it to market, getting an operator in there to sign an agreement of 25 years to give them that exit, to give them that long-term guarantee, maybe introduce funding solutions. So that's something we've been working on since January with my colleague Andrew Shaw. And we've got some really interesting, exciting projects, because you can imagine there are a lot of redundant assets out there that need new life breathed into them. And so that's really what we're helping these commercial landlords do, helping them understand that there's a whole asset class and type of use out there that they might not have considered, or maybe have considered but just don't quite know how to get there. So that's a big area for us.
It sounds like the landscape of those business areas is going to change. You're going to see a slightly different type of accommodation. You think that will spread then beyond the more business areas into sort of like, I know you got viability is a big thing, but do you see it sort of catching on elsewhere?
Well, the thing is, not necessarily for corporate housing. That corporate housing or service department for corporates, it's led by a specific demand. And more often than not, it's either a CBD district like London, where there are thousands of businesses there that will uh, have a requirement for employees coming in there, big and small. And then there'll be pockets of demand across the country, like a manufacturing plant, an aerospace demand, an industrial complex, or so maybe an Amazon office. But other than that, a lot of the demand that will be around the country will be just, I don't know, leisure or sporadic demand. And it's
Right.
often these service departments, they operate from purely residential buildings, sometimes in shared blocks, sometimes private homes. How viable is that long term? Because ultimately, we have a housing shortage in the UK. The government's doing everything they can, seemingly, to solve it. We're certainly talking a good game, and one thing that they're bringing in or looking to bring in, will be registration and effectively use classes for serviced accommodation that kind of identify what it is, rather than say a residential building being operated for short lets, either in breach of planning permission or with consent of local authority. So I think with regulation, I guess, comes a more sort of solid industry. And with companies like the ASAP, the Association of Service Department Providers, doing what they can to legitimise the sector, it can only really be a good thing.
Sounds good. It sounds exciting. Ben, it's been great speaking to you. It's been insightful. I mean, I've got more questions, but you've answered the main one. So thank you for your time, and yeah, it's been really good to speak to you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.